It provided undeniable evidence for all my doubts. It was Hi, my name is Gianna from Miami. I would like to share the crazy tale of my relationship, so stay tuned. My husband, Chris, was supposed to be on a 3-day business trip in New Jersey, yet it seemed that I had just seen him on a live broadcast with another woman in his arms. Just as I was about to look into the TV to get a better view and understanding, the TV signal became weak. For 3 minutes, I tried to fix it. After no success with restoring the signal, I video called him. The phone rang for a long while before he finally answered. Chris's camera shook slightly, and his handsome face appeared. He greeted me warmly.
What's up, honey?
Where are you? I asked urgently as my eyes scanned the footage in his background. To me, it seemed like he was in the corridor of a restaurant, and he was in a suit, wearing a white shirt. However, the figure I saw in the live broadcast wore a gray windbreaker.
I'm having dinner with a client. What's up? Is there something wrong? Is Sabrina asleep?
He asked. Are you in New Jersey? I sidestepped his question and asked.
Of course I am. What are you talking about?
He looked at me seriously through the camera, full of curiosity. It's nothing. I mumbled absent-mindedly, then asked, when are you coming home?
Soon. I'll be back once I wrap things up here.
Chris smiled affectionately at me.
Go to bed early, okay? I still have things to attend to. Love you. I'll see you tomorrow.
He blew a kiss to me and then hung up the call. I held my phone, stunned and annoyed at myself for being suspicious. Chris was an extraordinary, handsome, and doting husband, even though he was just a pauper when we first met. After graduation from the University of Miami, I used my parents' house as collateral to start a supply company with him and stayed by his side. Fortunately, the company grew and began thriving. When I was expectant, I decided to entrust the company to my husband while I focused on raising our child and managing our home. Sabrina, our daughter, had turned 4. We led a comfortable and well-off life as a family of 3, which people were envious of. Chris felt so guilty that we didn't have a wedding ceremony that he promised to provide for me and make up for any grievances I suffered. How could such a husband betray me? Could he really do anything to hurt me? I pursed my mouth and smiled, realizing I had watched too many TV shows. Yes, being a stay-at-home mom, I get to watch a lot of television. However, there's nothing I enjoy more than clicking on an Exploring Relationship Dilemmas playlist. They have the best relationship stories ever, and you should hit that subscribe button to not miss out on free entertainment. Anyway, when I laid back in bed, I still thought about the fleeting figure on the live broadcast. I must have been thinking about Chris too much. Also, the windbreaker looked familiar as it was the one I had ironed for him before his business trip. That means the man in the live stream wore a similar one, which confused me. Chris returned early the following day. He hugged me and Sabrina affectionately, creating a heartwarming atmosphere. I rushed to the kitchen happily to prepare several of his favorite dishes to welcome him home. After dinner, I quickly put Sabrina to bed and then showered. Before I laid my head to sleep, his phone on the bedside table flashed, indicating he had received a message. I glanced at it and froze. I was about to pick up the phone to see who the sender was, when Chris hurried into the room and took the phone. He glanced at it hastily, then looked back at me and said that it was Bree. What's the matter? Are you afraid that I'll find something? I looked at him suspiciously and felt uneasy as if something was wrong. The message had only 4 words. Did she find out? It was enough for me because it implied the other person feared I'd find out about something. Chris chuckled casually and threw the phone back on the bedside table. Then he pulled me into his arms and kissed my face, saying,
You're overthinking. It's my sister, Bree. She's using me as a cover to get some money from Mom.
Bree was Chris's younger sister. She had been weak and sickly since childhood, so her family always pampered and spoiled her. Bree was in her 20s, but never took anything seriously. She didn't even go to school and only partied and had fun. Get money from your mom? Where do you think her money comes from? I snapped. Chris smiled, bent down, and lifted me in his arms. Then he nibbled on my earlobe as he cuddled with me in bed.
I know. It's all your money. That's what happens when somebody marries an amazing and understanding woman like you.
I appreciated his words. Throughout the years, I had never been stingy regarding his family. In any way possible, I would lend a helping hand when it came to finances. The following day, just after dropping Sabrina off at kindergarten, I received a call from my best friend, Valentina. She said she wanted to meet at our usual spot. Of course, I immediately responded and took a cab to the location. Valentina and I were close, just like sisters. We could talk about anything, but it was rare for her to call me. After all, she was a busy woman who worked as a talent manager in a media company. When I entered our favorite Starbucks shop, I saw her sitting in the corner, typing away on her laptop. She waved at me as I approached, and I sat down before playfully asking, "Why are you so free today? You even had time to ask me out so early in the morning." Valentina rolled her eyes at me and replied,
"Can I be concerned about you?"
"Sure you can." I sat down and sipped the coffee she had ordered for me. "But aren't you always busy while I'm always free?"
Ha! Aren't you ashamed of that? Now all I see is Chris spoiling you. Don't say I didn't warn you, but don't get too comfortable. It's easy to become a fool.
Valentina said, looking at me intently. For some reason, her words made my heart pound. I looked at her and casually asked, "What do you mean? There's more to your words, isn't there?" She lowered her gaze, looking at the computer screen, seemingly trying to hide something.
Oh, nothing. I'm just teasing you a little.
After some thought, she looked at me and said,
I saw Chris the day before yesterday.
2 days ago? Where? I asked, feeling a little anxious. Valentina noticed my reaction and retorted,
What's with that look?
"Where did you see him?" I couldn't care less about bantering with her and continued pressing for answers. However, Valentina's phone started ringing. She glanced at the screen and hushed me before answering the call. After a few sentences, she straightened up, glanced at me, and said,
What? I'll be right there.
Immediately after, she closed her laptop and stuffed it into her bag.
I have to go. Let's meet up another time.
"Wait, can you please explain what happened?" I had more questions for her, but she ignored me and left. She said she saw Chris 2 days ago, but he was supposed to be in New Jersey then. Where did she see him? I shrunk back into the seat silently. I was helpless, but a strange sense of fear filled my heart. The video kept playing in my mind, but I wasn't sure if it was Chris. Was he lying to me? I headed home and sat alone with my mind in turmoil. Despite the warm sunlight shining on me, I couldn't stop shivering. I wondered what I would have to do if Chris had an affair, and what would happen to Sabrina. I was so absent-minded the whole day that I forgot to pick Sabrina up. Fortunately, Chris returned early. He quickly comforted me and left for kindergarten. Once he left, I forced myself to get up and started cooking. Before Chris returned, Bree walked in unexpectedly. She had a key to our place and treated it as her own home. Although I disliked this, Chris indulged her. When she saw me in the kitchen, she put down her bag and came over. She leaned against the door and asked me about where Chris was. I was washing the veggies as I replied. He went to pick Sabrina up.
It's already late and he's only going to pick her up now?
Bree's tone carried a hint of reproach. She always acted pampered and arrogant, as if she was the boss of the house. Just then, Sabrina's tender voice echoed from the doorway.
Mommy, I'm back. Why did you forget to pick me up today?
She ran up to me, looking at me with her head tilted. Although I felt guilty, I smiled and pinched her nose. I was busy. I promise I won't forget my baby next time. Chris walked through the doorway and looked at us dotingly. Meanwhile, Bree approached the doorway and greeted him.
Chris.
Why are you here?
Chris asked as he entered the kitchen and wrapped his arms around me. The next second, he removed my apron and put it on himself.
I got this, honey. You can go play with Sabrina.
Bree stared at her brother and sarcastically remarked,
My brother is such a good husband. I want to find someone like him in the future.
Chris snapped.
Just leave the kitchen and wait for the meal.
I don't want to.
Bree spoke playfully, then squeezed into the kitchen.
I want to experience being supportive.
I sighed at her words and thought she was shameless. I knew she was only ingratiating herself with Chris to ask for money again. She was practically a parasite, yet unapologetic, and still dared to be carefree. I took my daughter's hand and left the kitchen. If Bree was out of sight, she was out of mind. Just then, my phone rang, and when I looked, it was a video call from Valentina. I hurried back to the bedroom and answered the call to complain. "You're something else, huh? You left me hanging."
Something came up at work.
Valentina sounded tired. I couldn't hold back and asked her, you mentioned seeing Chris 2 days ago. Where was he?" This question had been bugging me all day. Valentina paused before she answered calmly,
Honestly, I forgot the exact location. It was just a fleeting glimpse while I was driving.
"Oh." For some reason, her answer left me a bit disappointed. Although my heart dropped, I unclenched my fists and realized my palms were cold and sweaty.
I know how obsessed you are with your husband, but can't you prioritize yourself more? You seem completely disconnected from the outside world because of him. Will you even count the money for him if he betrays you for money?
Valentina mocked me. "Chris will never do that to me." I retorted.
Yeah, he will never do that, but I will.
Valentina sneered.
The truth hurts sometimes, but you must have values. Now you're just being a fool.
Valentina babbled, and I had no time to refute. She noticed my silence and softened her tone.
Gianna, you used to be a top student, my superstar. I just think it's a pity to see you wasting your time at home like this.
Enough. This is like giving me a pat on the back after humiliating me. We both laughed when I said that. Still, I knew Valentina always spoke her mind. Although she had mentioned similar things before, hearing them again today felt different. I couldn't help but wondered if Valentina was trying to imply something. Just then, Chris walked in with a gentle smile and told me that dinner was ready. Valentina heard his voice and said,
All right, go have your dinner.
Then she lowered her voice.
Take my words to heart.
With that, she hung up. Chris pulled me into his arms and kissed me.
Who was that?
Valentina.
What did she say? Was she nagging again?
Chris smiled tenderly. He knew how close Valentina and I were because the three of us were former classmates.
I haven't seen her in a long while.
My mind began to spin. Chris said he hadn't seen her in a while, so Valentina was far away when she saw him. I felt relieved and knew I was overthinking. Chris noticed my absent-mindedness and leaned down to look at me. He asked me whether everything was all right. I looked at him and told him that I was fine and that we should go have dinner. Chris pulled me close and kissed me again before we walked outside. Even so, my doubts somehow grew heavier. Bree didn't stay long after dinner. She pouted at Chris and asked him whether he could give her a ride. I rolled my eyes at her and glanced her way, but she feigned ignorance as she clung to Chris's hug. Chris looked at me helplessly. I was honestly sick of Bree, so I waved her away. I told Chris to take her where she wanted to go and said that I would take care of the dishes. He promised to come back early, then he left to drop Bree off. Bree held onto her brother's arm, glancing back at me with a mysterious smile, but I couldn't be bothered. Chris returned late that night, but I didn't ask much. Since he was a dutiful son, I assumed he chatted with his parents before coming home. He woke up early the following day, took Sabrina with him, and dropped her off at kindergarten to save me the trouble. Chris was always so considerate, leaving me nothing to complain about. I tidied up the clothes he had changed out of and checked the pockets before washing them. I didn't expect to find something. Still, I decided to do it anyway. My gut just pushed me to do it. As I dipped my hand into the pocket, I felt something as if it was in a sachet. I pulled it out, and I was shocked and horrified by what I held. It provided undeniable evidence for all my doubts. It was protection. After giving birth to Sabrina, I had surgery, so we didn't need to use any sort of protection. I threw the disgusting thing away, and my heart shattered to pieces. How could he do this to me? I felt helpless as I sat on the couch, and held my head. Images of him and another woman swirled in my mind, adding to my heartache. I had given everything to him and this family, yet he treated me like dirt. After my initial shock, I mumbled to myself repeatedly, "Gianna, calm down. You can't afford to lose everything you've worked so hard for." I needed to give myself a clear and definitive answer. Once I recollected my emotions, I washed up and took a cab to the company building. I had only visited Senate Corporation once when they first relocated to Miami Tower. Chris took me there, and we rented an entire floor. That day, he held me as we stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, and he said affectionately,
Thank you for changing my life. Believe me, my love. It won't be long before I give this building to you.
I chuckled at his words. Now, he was about to tear it all apart. When I entered the building, the young and attractive receptionist asked me who I was looking for. When I mentioned Chris's name, she gave me a quick glance over and said with a smile that Mr. Chris was not in, that he had gone out with his wife. My head buzzed when I heard that. I tightened my grip around my handbag, but my voice turned somewhat sharp despite my efforts to control my emotions. Subconsciously, I asked again what she said before asking her whether she was sure about this. She looked at me in puzzlement and confirmed as she said,
Why, yes. You asked for Mr. Chris of Senate Corporation from the 10th floor, right? He left early this morning with his wife.
She certainly sent shivers down my spine. I felt tempted to ask who Chris's wife was. If another woman was his wife, who am I? However, I held myself back and clenched my teeth. Then I turned and left Miami Tower. I wanted to leave with dignity and really hoped the receptionist had made a mistake. Ultimately, I texted Antonio from the company's marketing department. My hands shook, but I calmed myself before asking in the text, "Hey, Antonio, is Chris done with his meeting? I've been trying to call him, but he's not picking up. I'm starting to get a little worried." Antonio was one of the high-ranking executives at Senate Corporation, so he would know if there was a meeting. Upon seeing my text, he took a while to reply. He sent me a text, and it said, "Meeting? There's no meeting today, Mrs. Jones. Mr. Jones is out." After reading the text, I was shocked and could only exclaim to myself. At that moment, a sense of powerlessness washed over me. My tense nerves collapsed, and I felt my knees buckle. My hand that held the phone shook uncontrollably. I couldn't even muster the courage to call Chris and ask where he was. Was there even a need to ask? He would just lie to me again. He brazenly paraded around Miami Tower with another woman, making everyone believe the other woman was his wife. That woman could freely enter and exit, step into the company I had built independently, and enjoy privileges that should have been mine. I felt lost as I stood on the street among the crowd, and he was nowhere in sight. He resembled sand, slipping through my fingers. The more I tried to grasp him, the faster he slipped away. After thinking things through, I found out who this Mrs. Jones really was. With that idea in mind, I gathered the strength to move my trembling legs and hailed a cab. Once I reached home, I went to the nearby grocery store and bought ingredients for many of Chris's favorite dishes. I even picked out some pineapples that Sabrina loved. I was going to wait for him to come home. As I busied myself with chores, I thought about my next step. I always thought time passed too quickly, but this time was different, as it seemed to drag on endlessly. When evening arrived, I gathered my courage to call Chris and ask where he was, before telling him to pick Sabrina up. He readily agreed. I had almost finished preparing the food when Chris returned with our daughter. Sabrina ran in, exclaiming in her sweet and childish voice,
Mommy, I'm back.
Her adorable voice brought tears to my eyes, but I suppressed my emotions. "I got you some pineapples. Your favorite, right?"
Oh, Mommy, you're the best.
She ran out and headed to Chris, saying,
Daddy, I want to eat pineapples.
Just a small piece. You can have more after dinner, okay?
Chris washed his hands and fed our eager little girl. Then he squeezed into the tiny kitchen and hugged me from behind. He proceeded to ask me why I had made so much food. I felt terrible because this once happy family of 3 was now on the verge of collapsing. "You just came back from a business trip. You must be tired." I forced a smile and asked, "Were you busy today?" He hummed a reply, and my heart immediately sank. I playfully nudged him with my elbow. Go set the table. His intimate attempts made me sick. I wondered if he thought of the other woman whenever he held me. When I finished cooking, I smiled and asked, "Do you want a drink?" "It's been a while, and I want a glass of wine." Chris looked at me questioningly.
Why do you suddenly want a drink?
"No reason," I answered as I turned to get the wine. "Since I made so many dishes, we need to celebrate." I knew Chris couldn't handle wine well, so I poured him a little to avoid arousing suspicion. Then I poured myself half a glass and toasted with him. Once we started drinking, we became excited and talkative. I pretended to be in high spirits as I reminisced about our college days, starting the business, and our current life. Chris noticed how cheerful I was and poured himself another glass of wine. Ultimately, he was drunk when I helped him onto the bed. Afterward, I put Sabrina to bed before beginning my mission. My heart was pounding as it was my first time looking through his things in so many years. I must have been too innocent to trust him. I searched through his pockets and bag, but found nothing valuable. Finally, I found his phone, but it had a fingerprint lock. I quietly approached him, trying to grab his hand, but he suddenly turned and caught me, staring at me with sharp eyes. My heart was about to jump out.
I need water.
He slurred at me. I ran out to pour him a glass of water and fed it to him. Then he collapsed back onto the bed, fast asleep. I unlocked and looked through his phone but found no suspicious names in the call history. I recognized most of them, and it seemed like very few were female, so I ruled them out. Then I checked his messages only to realize he hadn't been messaging many people. I opened the conversation of the first contact and saw the message from the day he returned. Did she find out? It was just those 4 words with no additional information. I clicked on the number's profile and wanted to see whether I could connect to any social media accounts or WhatsApp, but I couldn't. I couldn't find any clues about who the sender was. It seemed like this person was cautious. Chris told me it was Bree, but I needed to verify it. His photo albums included pictures of Sabrina and me and 2 of Bree. Besides that, his phone was clean. I even scanned the phone with an app, but nothing suspicious was there too. I tossed and turned that night, wondering how there could be no traces. I figured the woman wasn't someone from the company or the building. Otherwise, the receptionist wouldn't have called her Mrs. Jones. I wondered who that other woman was, or if I'd ever interacted with her. I forced myself out of bed the following day. The dark circles around my eyes were horrible, and Chris noticed them. He asked in surprise,
Are you sick, honey? Why do you look so pale?
"You kept me up all night," I retorted, not in the mood for pleasantries. He was stunned but hugged me with a shy grin.
No more drinking for you. Exercise is better instead since it helps with sleep.
I didn't know why, but my stomach churned when I heard his words. I rushed to the bathroom, vomiting and crying. Chris rushed in behind me and patted my back.
What's wrong with you? Maybe I should take you to the hospital.
I pushed him away and lied. "It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well. You should take Sabrina to kindergarten. I'll be fine once I rest a bit more." He lifted and laid me back on the bed, pulling the blanket over me.
Then get some sleep while I send Sabrina to school. If you don't feel well, just call me, okay?
I nodded and listened to my husband and daughter's chatter get softer as they left. Finally, they closed the door behind them, and I left the bed to run to the window. I watched Chris enter the car with my excited daughter. I didn't look away until Chris drove out of the gated community. My eyes teared up as I wondered if only everything could return to how it was before. Afterward, I changed into my jeans and t-shirt before slipping on a cap. Then I went to the cafe across from Miami Tower and found the most strategic spot facing the entrance. I knew it was not smart, but I thought it was the most efficient way. However, I returned home empty-handed for 3 consecutive days. I couldn't even see Chris because I overlooked one crucial detail. He often used the underground parking, which had a direct passage to the lobby. I only realized this on the 4th day. Just as I thought I was at a loss, I saw Chris hurrying out of the building with his phone. He seemed to be talking on the phone as he headed toward a cafe opposite Miami Tower. My heart raced as I followed him from a distance. He crossed the road at an intersection ahead, and enter the cafe with quaint decorations and an elegant environment. It was the perfect place for elites in the surrounding commercial district to hang out and discuss business here. I guess Chris was meeting someone there and glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows, wondering if I should follow him inside. Just then, I saw someone sitting by the window. The person wore a stunning professional pantsuit, looking bold and graceful. It was Valentina. She looked more beautiful than usual today. I chuckled and thought it was a coincidence that she was there too. It meant I wouldn't have to put in much effort since Valentina could see who Chris was with. With that thought in mind, I picked up my phone and called her. I saw Valentina pick up the phone, but I was surprised to see Chris at the window. I watched as Valentina signaled Chris to stay quiet before her voice came through the phone.
Are you bored or something?
Those words struck my nerves. If this had happened in the past, I might have considered it playful teasing between friends, but now I detected mockery behind her words. It hurt more than seeing her with Chris. I asked, "Where are you?"
I'm in a meeting at the office. I'll call you back later.
I saw Valentina gazing at Chris as she spoke. Her answer left me speechless. I smiled bitterly, then replied,
Okay.
before hanging up. I finally realized how unpredictable people could be. No wonder she tried to probe me by claiming to have seen Chris. It became evident that it was because of her guilty conscience. Chris had said it had been long since he last saw Valentina. I felt heartbroken that he had deceived me like that. I invested myself in Valentina and Chris in this unfamiliar city, and they betrayed me. See, I had spent all my life in Louisiana. I only moved to Miami when I was accepted to the University of Miami. I didn't know that life in the city was this cruel. I didn't know who to trust anymore. I kept staring at the window before calling Chris. As I suspected, his response matched Valentina's. He too, of course, claimed to be in a meeting. I was outraged and decided to rush to the cafe to confront them, but my phone rang just as I was about to enter the cafe. Chris and Valentina had not seen me. I stared at my phone, Bree's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, torn between the need to answer and the urge to confront Chris and Valentina. Finally, I swiped to accept the call, my heart racing. As I listened to Bree's voice, the background noise of the cafe faded away, replaced by the mounting turmoil inside me. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my composure. My eyes flicked back to the cafe, where Chris leaned in closer to Valentina, the way he used to with me, his smile lighting up his face. Bree's voice was insistent, pulling me from my thoughts. I barely registered what she was saying. All I could think about was the lies, the deceit that had wrapped around my life like a vine, choking the trust I had for them both.
Gianna, I'm talking to you. I need the key right now.
I hung up, cutting her off. It was just her childish tantrums. I couldn't care less. My heart thundered in my chest as I stepped forward, the door parting open with a soft chime that felt like a death knell. Inside, Chris turned at the sound, his face shifting from surprise to confusion, then panic. He pushed Valentina's face away, and his face was full of shame. Valentina's expression mirrored his, but her eyes held something else: fear. I approached their table, my breath quickening. The air was thick with unspoken words, and for a moment, time stood still. The clinking of cups and low murmur of conversation faded into the background.
Gianna, wait.
Chris started, but I raised a hand, silencing him. Every muscle in my body felt tight as I searched their faces. I wanted them to see the hurt, the betrayal etched into my features. I was the one who had stood by Valentina through thick and thin, who had welcomed Chris into my life with open arms. And here they were, hiding behind their lies, pretending everything was normal. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? The words slipped out, laced with venom. Chris opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Valentina's eyes glistened with tears, but I couldn't afford to feel pity for her. I had trusted her, and she had chosen to betray my trust. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, the door closing shut behind me. The weight of their silence pressed down on me. Outside, the sun beat down, the brightness a stark contrast to the storm brewing within me. I felt hollow, yet filled with a rage I hadn't known I was capable of. I stumbled through the streets, my heart heavy with betrayal and thoughts of Sabrina, my daughter with Chris. She was the light of my life, and I couldn't bear the thought of her innocence being shattered by the chaos swirling around us. After confronting Chris and Valentina at the cafe, I was overwhelmed with anger, but more so with a fierce desire to protect Sabrina. She deserved a stable and loving environment, even if her parents couldn't provide that anymore. Therefore, for Sabrina's sake, I forced myself to sit down with Chris for difficult conversations in the days that followed. He was remorseful, his guilt palpable.
I never wanted to hurt you or Sabrina,
He admitted, his voice shaking as tears rolled down his face.
but I've messed up so badly.
I looked at him, torn between the hurt he caused and the man I once loved. You need to take responsibility, Chris. For her sake, we can't let this destroy her. It was clear we needed to prioritize Sabrina. We agreed to attend family therapy together, focusing on how to navigate this new reality while keeping Sabrina's well-being at the forefront. Chris moved out, but we made it a point to keep our interactions civil for her sake. Sabrina was too young to fully understand the complexities of adult relationships, but she sensed the tension. She'd come to me, her big eyes wide with worry.
Mommy, is everything okay? Why is Daddy not home?
I would hold her close, reassuring her, "Everything is fine, sweetie. We just need a little time to figure things out." It broke my heart to see her worry, but I remained steadfast, determined to shield her from the fallout. I realized I couldn't ignore the impact it had on Senate Corporation, the company Chris and I had built together. Founded on a shared vision, Senate Corporation had always been a cornerstone of our partnership, but the betrayal threatened to unravel everything we'd worked for. I had started the company after coming out of college and entrusted it to Chris when we had Sabrina. After Chris's affair came to light, we both faced an uphill battle to keep the company afloat. Clients sensed the tension between us, and rumors began to circulate within the team. It was essential for us to put our differences aside and focus on the business, not just for our own sakes, but for the employees who depended on us. We decided to bring in a mediator, Antonio from the marketing department. Antonio was someone who could help with running the company despite our shared tension. This decision was difficult, but it proved to be a turning point. Antonio guided us through the tough conversations. Senate Corporation slowly managed to regain its footing. We started to secure new contracts, and our existing clients began to express confidence in our ability to deliver results. The team rallied around us, inspired by our commitment to moving forward despite the challenges. As the weeks rolled on, I found a new rhythm in my life, one that was surprisingly empowering. I was no longer just Gianna, the betrayed partner. I was a mother determined to carve a stable path for Sabrina and a businesswoman intent on saving Senate Corporation. The therapy sessions with Chris were a mixed bag of emotions. Some days, we shared breakthroughs and laughter, reminiscing about happier times, while other days left us both raw and vulnerable, facing the reality of our fractured relationship. Yet through it all, there was a common goal: our daughter. As the tension within the company eased, Antonio's guidance became invaluable. He organized weekly strategy meetings where Chris and I discussed the company's direction, balancing our personal issues with the demands of running a business. It was challenging, but slowly, we found a tentative partnership emerging, one built on respect for our shared history rather than the weight of betrayal. One evening, while poring over project proposals with Chris, I looked up and noticed a subtle change in his demeanor. He seemed more present, focused.
Gianna,
He began, hesitation evident in his voice.
I know I've made mistakes, but I want to show you that I can be better. For Sabrina, for you, and for the company. I'm committed to this.
I took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of hope. You have to earn that trust back, Chris. It won't happen overnight, but I'm willing to give you a chance, for Sabrina's sake. It was a start. Over the following months, we continued to rebuild, not just our company, but our relationship as co-parents. Sabrina often asked about Chris, and I made it a point to share positive stories, keeping her worries at bay. Then, one day, as I was dropping her off at school, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd, Valentina. My heart tightened, and old emotions surged up like a tide. But this time, I felt different. I had learned to channel my anger and hurt into strength. I took a deep breath and approached her. "Valentina," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." Her surprise was palpable, but she nodded. We found a quiet corner away from prying eyes, and I laid it all out. "You need to understand how your actions affected Sabrina and me. I trusted you, and you broke that trust in the worst way possible. If we're going to be in the same circle, we need to figure this out." Valentina's eyes softened. Genuine remorse etched on her face.
I know I messed up, Gianna. I was selfish and didn't think about how it would affect you or Sabrina. I never intended to hurt anyone.
"Intention doesn't change the outcome," I replied, but I felt a glimmer of understanding. "Moving forward, I need you to be honest. If you care about Chris, then be mindful of how you approach this. Sabrina doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle." With a nod, she promised to respect our boundaries. It felt good to reclaim my power, to set the terms of engagement rather than being swept along by the currents of betrayal. As summer approached, Chris and I found a new equilibrium. Our focus on the company bore fruit. We celebrated milestones, not as a couple but as partners, cheering each other on in the conference room where our dreams had once taken flight. Then came the moment that solidified our commitment to moving forward, a company retreat. We rented a beach house for the weekend, inviting our team to relax, connect, and brainstorm. It was a chance to bond, to remind everyone of our vision for Senate Corporation. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered around a fire pit, the crackling flames illuminating our faces. Sabrina played with the other kids, her laughter mingling with the warm ocean breeze. Chris stood next to me, his expression one of quiet determination.
We've faced challenges,
He began, staring into my eyes.
but together, we've shown resilience. Let's continue to build something amazing, not just for ourselves, but for our families and our community.
His words resonated, igniting a renewed sense of purpose among us. We shared stories, laughter, and dreams under the stars, leaving behind the shadows of the past. In the weeks that followed, the business thrived, but more importantly, so did Sabrina. She often ran into the office, bringing her smile and joy, reminding us why we fought so hard. As I watched Chris with her, my heart softened. He was stepping up, taking responsibility, not only for his mistakes, but for our family. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. We were rebuilding, brick by brick, a foundation stronger than before. I would protect my daughter and pursue my dreams, no matter the hurdles. Miami, with all its challenges, had become the setting of my journey. And as I looked out at the ocean, I knew I was finally ready to embrace whatever came next.
Wow, now that's what I call a happy ending. Despite all she faced, she managed to put aside her anger and resentment for her husband and for her daughter's sake. Sometimes, guys, it's always good to forgive and give a second chance, just as Gianna did. Don't let anger and bitterness spoil your life entirely. If you enjoyed Gianna's story, smash that thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't, please. Ever wondered what it's like to be in a toxic relationship? Check out this story to understand what I'm talking about. Thanks for watching.